Ollie, the big question, can the US and the EU make a deal?
Yeah, so Lizzie, I think everybody wants a fair deal. I think everybody's got a pretty different idea of what that means. Let's just get to the tweet that we got from Maros Sefcovic, the trade representative from the EU, after his discussions with leaders and policymakers over in the United States, saying that the EU remains constructive and ready for a fair deal, including reciprocity through zero tariffs. On industrial goods and also working on non-tariff barriers. Let's deal with each of those, right? There's zero for zero. This is the proposition of basically creating a free trade zone between the EU and the United States on industrial goods. We should say that before all of the tariff activity that the United States imposed upon the EU and around the world, the basic difference in terms of tariffs between the EU and the United States was about 0.5% on average. So if we're going to imagine what the United States wants, they're going to want something much bigger than that. That takes us to the very thorny and very complex discussion of the non-tariff barriers that the U.S. wants to dissolve from the EU. What they mean by that is still not entirely clear. We had Peter Navarro over the weekend talking about value-added tax. Whenever you talk to ministers in Europe about getting rid of the value-added tax, it's basically a non-starter. It's effectively a sales tax that is indiscriminate on whether something is an export or an import. You have food safety standards. This is another issue that the Trump administration has brought up on repeated occasions. There are also potentially something where you could actually find some space, potentially auto regulations. If you have a sort of uniform auto regulation for the EU and the United States, you don't need to have two different kinds of cars for two different kinds of regimes. So these are some of the conversations that are being held here. The fine line for European policymakers is basically giving concessions to the United States while at the same time not really letting D.C. legislate domestic law to the Europeans.
And so, Ollie, given the reprieve that we might see when it comes to autos, given that we're seeing the DAX outperforming in terms of the futures this morning for Europe, the DAX is up 0.25%, Euro Stoxx 50 futures down 0.1%. What do you expect is going to be the reaction from Europe's automakers this morning?
Yeah, so let's just get to sort of what the president actually said, because in all of these discussions and basically the markets hanging on every single word of every single member of the cabinet, we did hear from Donald Trump yesterday talking about the auto tariffs. Have a listen to what he had to say.
I'm looking at something to help some of the car companies where they're switching to parts that were made in Canada, Mexico, and other places, and they need a little bit of time because they're going to make them here. But they need a little bit of time. So I'm talking about things like that. But the European Union has taken terrible advantage. They don't take our food products. They don't take our cars. We have millions of their cars, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, many others. They come in by the millions. They don't take, there are no Chevrolets in Munich, I can tell you that.
And Lizzie, I can confirm I've never seen a Chevrolet in Munich, but what we might be able to see is no tariffs imposed on those low-cost parts. And this is a huge part of the system here for these automakers who have been lobbying the Trump administration for a number of months to try to get a sort of carve-out. Remember, he already delayed the tariff on those low-cost parts until May the 3rd. We may get that extended a little bit further, and we saw a very sort of euphoric reaction in the U.S. automakers. Saw Ford, GM, Stellantis all gaining a lot yesterday, just showing you, Lizzie, how sensitive this market is to any potential bad news, but of course, also to good news.